the person grieving is the person who has experienced the loss. The person who is gone is gone. And whatever your religious or spiritual beliefs might be about what happens in the afterlife, the fact remains is they're not here to experience it. So for me, grief has always been about recognizing the experience of loss and being able to find ways to reconcile you moving forward in life without that person in your life. And so, I find this idea of celebrity grief interesting. I've always been fascinated by it. I was a huge, I guess wouldn't use past tense. I was a huge Michael Jackson fan. And I know he's a complicated character. We won't get into all that in this this episode. And I was deeply impacted when he passed away. But it didn't hit home for me in the way that it did for some folks, right? Or like you talk about when Prince passes. And I think there were a lot of people that cried because they experienced a sense of grief. In the people that I've talked to about Anthony Bourdain, Kate Spade passing, the impact has been these incidents as an opportunity to reflect on their own experiences with depression, on their own experiences with darkness. And what I find particularly important for us to really take a moment and be thoughtful about in terms of what it says about where we are as a collective is the things that I keep hearing people say over and over again was like, they seem like they had it all together. Or, right, so we revere celebrities and think that their lives are enriched because of their access to wealth and power and to celebrity, right? The kind of cult of celebrity that we create in the Western world. And so I think for a lot of people, it's been particularly upsetting because the thought is, well, if they're struggling and they felt like suicide was a viable option for them, how am I managing day in and day out? And I think the opportunity in this moment is to continue to have that conversation about what are the ways in which we as individuals can be a little bit more authentic and honest in a safe spaces, right? In appropriate ways and in safe spaces about our struggles, our mental health struggles, our emotional struggles, and how we can all take a moment to be a little bit more reflective about how we are demonstrating our care and concern for those of us around us who may be struggling. But it might look really, really shiny on the outside, but there's a different story on the inside. And so I think that's a little bit maybe of what gets people to hesitate from engaging in the conversation is because if I talk about your struggle, then I have to look at my own struggle. And I don't know that I want to do that because so there's a kind of contract of reciprocity that happens in relationships, right? So I share my stuff with you, you share your stuff with me. And so if we go there, are we really okay to go there? And I do think a lot of people feel overwhelmed about what to say because it then becomes, I think, a sense of responsibility that I must have the magic words to prevent this person from committing suicide, or that I must have the right thing to say or demonstrate the right capacity to help pull this person out of a depressive episode. And that's a heavy enterprise. I am a licensed mental health professional, and I've not worked with a lot of suicidal clients, but I've worked with enough and I remember them all because coming in close contact with someone that is in that depth of despair is not something that you easily forget or brush aside, even in my professional capacity. And I think we have to just, in some ways, I don't want to say normalize, but I think we have to get a little bit more comfortable with the reality that suicide is, it's a common option for folks. And it's also, in lots of cases, preventable in the right set of circumstances. And I think that's the hard part, to be able to look at both sides of that.
What I find interesting about what you're saying is the empathy surrounding talking about suicide and being able to really connect with the person. But I think that there's a correlation between suicide and depression, anxiety, and all of this. And that correlation is people don't understand it. So they don't know what to say. And I don't think that that's just a suicide. I think that's just how people are. People have a tendency, if it's something they don't understand or it's not their experience, to dismiss it. I remember the interview that Tom Cruise did, in which he disrespected
what was it?
Brooke Shields.
Yes,
for taking antidepressants.
Postpartum depression,
right? And that's not a real thing. And Well, kudos to you for finding the wonders of Scientology and having that help you. And that's no disrespect whatsoever to Scientologists or people's personal beliefs. People's personal beliefs.
That one specific. I disrespect that. I'm put that out there.
Look, if you want to go,
I understand. You don't have to.
Live your truth. That's your personal truth. Seriously, no, I'm not, and I'm actually not being shady.
I know you
when
are.
I usually am, but I'm really not. I'm not here to talk about people's belief systems. But what I am here to say is, what you ain't gonna do is invalidate my experience, Mr. Tom Cruise.
Right.
And
so let's talk about it. So I it's interesting to me, because I do hear people talk about someone being depressed, and we use it almost kind of colloquially, right? We use it as like a blanket term. And the reality is, having major depressive disorder is a specific kind of quantifiable, objective experience that people have. And one of I think the biggest misconceptions, there's lots of misconceptions, but I think I'll do these in order. For me, the top two has been in my experience. One is that people think being sad in and of itself is depression, right? So you're just really down, so therefore you're depressed.
Can
and
we
that's
just
not
pause?
Quite the same.
Can I please interject?
Yes.
What you're saying right now is part of the reason why I do not speak to people about being depressed and dealing with major depression disorder, because the first question, or the second, or maybe it's the third, is, well, what are you sad about? I don't understand. You seem so happy all the time. I am happy all the time. That's not what depression is. Well, how can you be depressed if you're not sad?
Yeah.
I'm going to need you to get a pamphlet. You don't even need to read a book. You can literally get a pamphlet and get it
Google.
Together.
It's highly. I was watching.
You got a smartphone. You know who Nicki Minaj dating, but you don't know about this. Come on.
Yes.
Stop.
Yes. I was watching a stand-up Netflix, and the stand-up comedian was saying, she said, I think these things are Googleable. And I was like, I'm going to start using that as a descriptor. So one, that I think, right, this is Googleable.
I love it.
Shout out to Tig Notaro, because that's her phrasing. So I think for me, that is a common thing that just kind of always internally grates on me, right? Being sad equals being depressed. And no, those are a different thing. And then the second piece that I think people get misconfused is what you said, right? That if you are depressed, then you must be sad and weeping all the time. And the reality is no. Oftentimes depression includes sadness, but it doesn't mean that it's going to always be observable. It doesn't even mean that people who are depressed or spend a lot of time weeping and crying. You could be deeply depressed for a significant period of time and not have the physical manifestations of crying. A lot of people are depressed, and it shows up as irritability. It shows up as crankiness, and it's an equally valid emotional response or component of being depressed. But when we talk about major depressive disorder, for me, in my understanding of the disorder and in my experience in treating it, there are two pieces that come up that are, for me, the most profound aspects of depression. And that is that I really like to think about it and talk about it as a true weighing down. It's a feeling of heaviness. So the word depression is quite descriptive when we think about the mental health diagnosis of major depressive disorder. There literally feels like a blanket, a weighted blanket is kind of covering the person's experience. And that means that their capacity to be in the world is happening in a depressed way. And that has implications in terms of their ability to sleep. That has implications in terms of their appetite. That has implications in terms of their changes in weight, et cetera, et cetera. People don't experience the same level of pleasure or have the same motivation to engage in activities that are fun for them. Oftentimes people will just not have energy, period. There can be things that they really want to do, things that would be fun to do, exciting to do, but they don't have the kind of internal spark to move forward in doing that thing. What we tend to find is, though, for folks, right, and so this is, let me be clear in saying this, not everybody who experiences depression is suicidal. I'm going to say that again. Not everyone who experiences depression is suicidal.
Right. Absolutely.
But what we find is for people who are suicidal or for whom suicide becomes an option is there are a couple different things, and I'll get into them each specifically in a second, but there's some hallmarks that I think really overlap with symptoms of depression. And I'm sharing these because these are the things that you would really, if you are a person listening right now and you think, I wonder if, or I'm worried about, these are the things that I would be telling you to look for. And one that we see across the board for folks that are suicidal is this profound sense of hopelessness. And that is this real notable inability to have a belief that things will be better. There is this almost embedded belief that things will not be better, right? So that is where some of those symptoms of depression, right, the mood state of being sad or being irritable or feeling down, feeling depressed, it moves to this place of despair. And there is a sense that this will always be the way things will be. That's where that sense of hopelessness comes in. And sometimes people also talk about it in conjunction with helplessness. So it's that things will always be this way and I don't have the capacity to make it better. And then the other piece is, you mentioned anxiety. And so another way to think about that may be agitation. Okay. So folks feel unsettled. They feel like they can't quite calm down or feel relaxed. And that is happening in conjunction with feeling depressed. So it's this really kind of oversensitized internal experience of being simultaneously hopeless, lacking energy, but also feeling kind of like agitated and easily aroused in a negative way with things happening around you.
And it also goes without saying that all of that, what you just described is individualized.
Yes.
Unfortunately, it's not a cookie cutter response. You can't just take and say, oh, this person has A, B, and C, and there's that. Because to your point, I actually don't deal with sadness. I'm not one to sit down and cry unless, it's a cutie in a movie being killed or something that may make me sad, But, right, seriously. But I'm a person who can get on a stage in front of 10,000 people and sing and act and lecture without any problem. Mm-hmm. But let 3 of those people surround me backstage and ask me questions, and there will be a significant problem because you're too close. You need to back away.
Right.
Can't be. That
is
how it manifests in me.
I think that's a great point to make, that also, I think, is part of the myths, right? Is that I'm talking about all of these sort of symptoms and characteristics in isolation. There's always